This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about what is config map, what is secret, right? Config map. Using config map, we can maintain key value pairs of data and also multi-line string file content. Also, we can maintain using config maps or secrets. These config maps and secrets can be used in your pods. The key value pairs of data you can use in the your container environment variables or command line arguments. If it is a file content, can I use these config maps or secrets as a values to mount those files to my containers in the pods? Yes. Your runtime configurations can be externally mounted to the pods or containers using these config maps and secrets. Yesterday, we already saw how to create a config map, key value pairs of data, and how to use that config map or secrets in our pod manifest. We already done that. Now let's consider I have one use case like this. Let's consider I have one use case like this. Now I have my Kubernetes cluster. I have some applications running. This is my node. I have some nodes in this cluster. I'm deploying one pod here. This pod has a container. This pod has a container. This pod has a container. Your application container. Now I have some file that can be any file. As part of the container file system, you have some file that can be your settings file, your property file, your application.property file, or your XML file, some kind of a XML file. If you are using Java, that can be Java with Spring Boot you are using. That can be your application.yaml file, your Spring Boot property file or YAML file, any file. Now I want that properties or that configuration files are varying from one environment to another environment. Can I externally pass those configurations to my prod container as a value? In the Docker, we use that bind mount concept. Here, we can use that concept same here. Now, let's say I'm taking this as an example. Let's say this is my Tomcat. I have some file like this Tomcat users.xml. Now, this XML file needs to be varied. This XML file should be varied for environment to environment. Now dev environment, I need to have a different configurations that in that file. In another environment like prod environment, I need to have a different configurations. Now how to do that? I want to pass different configurations in another cluster, let's say. In another cluster, this is my prod cluster, production Kubernetes cluster. Now same application, but the configuration should be changed. Now while creating a image in the Docker image, let's say while creating a image, I have something like this, the Tomcat users file, something like this. Just to give an example, I'm taking this as an example. I have a username like this. This can be applicable for any file, any configuration file, any property file, any file. Now I have password like this. While creating an image itself, if I do like this, is it going to be same file? Whatever file is your part of your image, will it be same here also, or anywhere? Yes. Now I want this to be different. I want this to be different here, this to be different here, but I don't want to create a different images. I don't want Docker two different images to be created. Now here, can I use the concept of that kind of a file mount? Can I mount file also to my container? The way we are mounting the folders, can I mount files also to my container? Yes. If you are using Docker, you can use that bind mount concept. But here in Kubernetes, what I can do, I will create a config map. I'll create a config map in this cluster. I'll create a config map in this cluster with this content. Let's say this content here. this content here. Now, can I use this config map as a value? Can I use this config map as a value? Can I use this config map as a value here? Then can I mount that config map content, that file content to my container? I am attaching this config map as a value to my pod. Then this content of that config map, the file content of this config map, I am attaching to my pod, that location, wherever I have that file. Now, does this will be reflected here, that file here? Now let's say in production, I'll create a config map with a different content. I'll create a config map with a different file content, something like this. Now, if I apply this, if I mount this config map, if I attach this config map to my pod, then the content I will mount to that my file in that pod container. Then in my prod, do I have these things in this XML file? Yes. So we can pass your configurations. I'm just taking this as an example. This is applicable for any file which you want to customize. Now let me demonstrate that scenario. Now let me take one application. Maybe let me take this application. Let me take this application. This application I am using Tomcat image. I am using Tomcat as a base image. I am copying my var file. I am copying my var file here. Now let's say I already have a Docker image created. Now let me deploy that image in my Kubernetes cluster as of now. Let me deploy that image in my Kubernetes cluster as a pod, that application. Let me connect to my Kubernetes cluster. Let's connect to this one, my master, where I have a kubectl. Here I have a kubectl. Now let me see if too many applications are running. I'll delete and I'll demonstrate. Okay, that is fine, only 3 applications. Now let's say I'm trying to deploy this application. One application like this. I don't want to waste much time. I'll just use that plugin to generate that manifest. Guys, when you guys are practicing, start typing from line by line so that it will be easy for you to understand and learn. Because to save the time, I am using this one. Sorry, that plugin is not there. Now I'm trying to deploy one application. Now let's say this is my image. I already have that image in the registry, in my Docker Hub registry. I already have that. Now this is my registry. I'm taking this as an example. Abhishek is asking, sir, in Tomcat users vary from environment to environment in all the projects. I'm taking this as a use case. But first of all, are we going to use that Tomcat GUI concept nowadays? Is anyone is using the Tomcat manager application or GUI application to deploy any var file, jar file like that? Sorry, any var file? No. I'm just taking that as a use case. Understand the concept, not what I am doing. Here is important, the concept. No one is using the Tomcat GUI, manager application, to deploy, because I already have that application as a WAR file. I already have that application WAR file in my Docker image. Do I need to again copy manually wherever that container is running? No, no one is using nowadays that one. Just I'm taking this as a use case. One example. This can be applicable for any file which you want to mount from outside. That can be your Nginx conf file, or that can be your maybe like your application.property file. If you are working on Java, there is a application properties or application YMLs, XMLs, those things. To make things simple, let's say you are running some software, that software configuration file you want to tweak. That is common, right? That is common from environment to environment. So I'm taking this as a use case. So let's consider this application, this registry, where, one second, not this one. Let's say what image I have. Okay, I have an image with the tag 1. Tag 1. Let me request minimum at least 256 MI and maybe 300 millicore. These are limits. Requests also. I'll request this much. My container port 8080. Now to access this one, you already know, I no need to explain that service is required. If you want to access that application inside or outside, you need a service. Service, use selectors. Port, whatever port 80, your target port 8080, service name, whatever you want to give, type of the service. If you want to access, now I can say node port. Now any namespace, that doesn't matter here. Since I have not given namespace for deployment as well as service, in which namespace this will be created? In the default namespace. Now let me deploy this. Let me deploy this. Let me deploy this. Now there is a deployment. There is a deployment. The pod is getting created. The pod is getting created. The container is getting created. It is pulling the image to create a container. So it will take some time. Let's wait. Now container is running. Now if you see kubectl exec, this pod, let's say I have this files user local tomcat/conf. Now I have some file like this. Inside that pod, I have only one container, that is my application, the Tomcat. Within that, this file is there. Now if you see this file content, I have not modified anything. This is the default. This is the default content of that file, just to give an example. This is the default content of that file, just to give an example. Now nothing is there. Everything is commented. Is everything is commented in this file? This file, everything is commented. Now I want to modify. I want to modify this configuration. I want to modify this configuration. I want to have a different configuration. Now one option, While creating an image itself, can I do like this? While creating an image itself, can I copy this file with whatever roles, users? Just to give an example, I'm taking this file as I already told. So can I have, while creating itself, I can do that. But if that is needs to be changed from environment to environment, if you are using Docker, normal containers or Docker Swarm, you can use the concept of bind mount. Now here, if I go inside the pod, if I modify this file, if I go inside the pod, if I go inside that container and modify the file, if the container is, if the pod is deleted or recreated, or if the container is restarted, if the container is also restarted, do you have those changes again? If I directly go inside this and modify, will I have those changes? Whatever I go and modify inside this pod container, if the pod is deleted, recreated, if container also restarted, do you have those changes? If the pod is deleted and restarted, no. Now I want those changes to be permanent. I want those changes to be permanent. At the same time, I want those changes to should vary from one environment to another environment. Now here, can I use a config map concept in Kubernetes? Config map. Config map as a file content. Yesterday also we used config map. Yesterday we demonstrated using key value pairs. Yesterday we demonstrated using these key value pairs. Now the way we have a key value pairs, can I have like this? This is multi-line string. This is one key. This is the content of that file. Can I have like this? Can I create one config map like this? Can I have whatever file content I have like this highlighted one? This is just an example. This is just an example. I can have the file like this. Now let me create a config map. Let me create a config map. Now here I am going to create a one more Kubernetes object called config map. Let's say I'm giving config map like a Java web app, something like this. Any name that doesn't matter. Here it is going to support key value pairs of data. Yesterday did we already demonstrated key value pairs of data? Suppose you have a requirement to pass some environment variables to your container. In the environment variables are command lines, you can refer, you can create a key and value here, you can refer that. Now my requirement is not a key value pair. Now can I refer something like this file content? Tomcat-users.xml. This is how I will define that multi-line string. Now it's not a key value pair, it's a multi-line string, something like this. Now can I have whatever I wanted to have? Now for better readability, I am removing all these things, whatever which is not required. I am removing all these things, whatever which is not required, but better readability. Now can I have something like this? Whatever is required, my Tomcat users file, let's say username is Mithun, password is test, roles, whatever roles like admin GUI. Just to give an example, I am taking this one, admin GUI. Another one is admin GUI, manager GUI, something is like, what is that? I don't remember that names. Admin GUI and manager GUI. Is this correct? Because nowadays no one will handle these things. Is it like just admin or manager, or admin GUI and manager GUI? I think it is admin GUI and manager GUI only. Let's say this is my Tomcat users file. Let's consider this is Tomcat users file. Just to make things simple, I got that from that one only. I got that one from there only. Or if you don't have Tomcat users XML, you can go to official website also. That Apache official website. You have that content also, like how it looks like the sample file. The sample file you can take the Tomcat users file. Manager GUI, manage admin GUI, what is all those things, something like this. That sample content also you can take that. If you don't have the Tomcat users XML file, you can download from official website also, or any other website, something like this. This one, to just minimize my content, I am just taking like this. Okay, now this is my content. Now this one, can I create as a config map that file content here? This is the key multi-line string, but here you need to have an indentation, guys. You need to have an indentation. So something like this. Minimum 2 lines should be there, that indentation. But in this file, you no need to have an indentation. In this file, you no need to have an indentation. Something is wrong here. Some additional dot is there. That's why is it throwing error here. So now here you need to have indentation. This doesn't matter whether you have 4 lines, 2 lines, that doesn't matter. That is related to your XML. Now, can I create a config map like this? Config map with this content. That can be any XML file, YML file, property file also. That can be your application property files. If you are using Java, you are reading some data configurations from properties, or YML files, your Spring Boot YML files, like that. Can I create a config map like this? Now, this config map, can I use as a value to this container? Can I use that config map as a value to this container? Yes. So here, values, but not at a container level. It is at a container, sorry, it is at a container level, values. Now values, name of the value, anything, name of the value, something like this. Here, can I use config map, the value as a config map like this? The type of the value is config map, the way they have given example here. They have created a key value pairs and also file content like this. In the pod manifest, can we use that as a value, like name, any name, config map, and name of the config map, name of the config map. Here, name, can I use this name, whatever name I have created, whatever name I used to create that config map, this is the name of the config map. Now this config map has items. Items are basically your files, whatever you have created like this, whatever you have created like this. These are the items of files. So I'm using that something like this, items, name and key. So something like this, whatever I have given here, this is the name and key. I am using like this, name also this, key also same, something like this, key also something like this, name as well as key. That items, sorry, not name, key and path, key and path, something like this. Now, if I just define like this, is this file will be mounted with your container? Is that file will be mounted with your container, whatever file location you want to mount? No. So do I need to use that as a mounts here? Do I need to use that as a value mounts here? Value mounts in your container level. Name. So whatever name I have config map, with same name I will have here mount path. So to which path I need to mount? So in my container, where exactly I want to mount, to which directory I want to mount in container, where that location I have that file, can I mount to this location? That file also completely. inside your container to which directory you want to mount. That is your mount path. Can I give mount path like this? But here, since you are mounting the file, you are giving the path of the file also. But here you need to give one more option called subpath. If you are mounting a single file, you need to use one more option called subpath. That subpath is basically your file name. That subpath is basically your file name. You need to give this one also, mount path as well as subpath. Without giving this mount subpath, if I give like this, because this folder has lot of other files also. This folder has lot of other files also. Not only Tomcat users do have other files also, like server.xml and other files, lot of other files also. Yes. So if I don't give this subpath, what will happen? This config map will be mounted with this folder, but only Tomcat users will be there. What about server.xml? Because I don't have any server.xml created as a file content in the config map, so it will be not available. So that's why I'm using this subpath along with mount path subpath. Now if I do like this, now let me create a deployment. Since it's a deployment, if I modify my deployment now, is parts is going to be recreated because I modified the deployment. My pod manifest is modified. Now is your pods are going to be recreated with these values now? I'm updating this and deploying, yes. Now let me do this. Let me do this. Now I have a config map. Guys, make sure your config map doesn't have any indentation problems. It doesn't have any indentation problems. So I have a config map. This is a file content. Now I'm using that config map as a value here that I have mounted to this container, that location. Now let me apply this. Let me apply this. Let me apply this. Now since it's a deployment got modified. Your container, is it following that rolling deployment strategy? First it is creating a container. Once this is ready, then only it will terminate that old pod. Even though I have not mentioned any deployment strategy in my deployment, what is the default deployment strategy? Even though I have not mentioned any strategy in my deployment, what is the default deployment strategy? Rolling update. Rolling update. Now the new pod is running. Now if I see the same thing now, kubectl exec in this pod, in this pod, in this location, again if I do this cat, now will I able to see that? 1 second. Will I able to see that whatever is part of my config map file content? Now can I see that now in my pod? So this way, will I able to mount, will I able to pass configurations from outside to my pods containers based on the environment? Can I have a different configurations and pass that to my pods, my containers? This is just one example. Don't always consider this is same. Based on your requirement, let's say you have some other XML file, some other YML file, some other property file. Can I use this config maps concept, config map as a values? Concept is important, not stepwise. Do this, do this, do this. This is not way of learning. Based on your requirement, you can use these concepts. Now, if required, can I use one more value? Suppose I want to maintain some data. Suppose I want to maintain some data. Can I use data value? Something like this. I want to mount one directory with value, kind of a persistent value. Can I use that one also here? Can I use one persistent value claim here? Can I mount that with persistent value claim? Something like this persistent value claim. Can I mount that with some directory if I want to maintain that one also? Yes. So based on your use case, you can use all these things. Now, If I just modify the config map, is it going to reflect automatically in your pod, guys? That is also you need to understand. Let's consider I am modifying my config map content. I am modifying my config map content. Do you think that will be automatically reflected in your pods containers? No. Does your pod needs to be restarted? I mean to say, does your containers needs to be restarted to reload that new data? Yes. So if you just modify the config map, now I'm just modifying the config map. Let's say I am modifying the config map like this password. I'm modifying the config map like this password. In the config map, I'm just changing something like this. Does this requires a redeployment? Because this is like a configuration. Does your process needs to be restored? Just to make sure, just understand the concept. Whether it's a container, whether it's a server, that doesn't matter. Anytime your conf file is modified, like are you restarting Tomcat like that to reflect that? Similarly, I am modifying the config map. So if this config map has to be reflected in your pods, does your pod needs to be recreated again? Does your pod needs to be recreated again? Yes. Similar concept here. Now I am modifying this config map. Let me apply this config map again. Let me apply this change kubectl apply. Now config map is changed. Now kubectl get conf cm in the short form cm config map. Now if you see, you can describe config map. You can get in a YML format also. Get config map in a YML format. Get config map, that config map name -o YML format. Now config map is updated. Config map is updated. This is the config map content. But if I see my pod, is it reflected in my pod? No. Now, if I delete and redeploy, will it reflect? Does that needs to be deleted and redeployed? Yes. For now, what I am doing, instead of deleting the deployment, I am just deleting the pod itself. Instead of deleting a deployment. Now, is pod is going to be recreated again, but this time same config map it is using, but config map got updated. Now in this new pod, can I see that content? Now can I see that updated one now? Is everyone clear what is config map, how to use config map or secret? Config maps and key secrets can be used to maintain some configurations as a key value pairs. Those key value pairs, can I use in my container, my pod environment variables or command line arguments? Yes. And at the same time, if I'm creating a config map as a file content, can I use those config maps or secrets also as a values? Can I mount those config map content as a values like this, the way I have done? Yes. Is everyone clear? This config map and secret very important. We are going to use all these concepts in our applications. Now, if it is a production cluster, can I create a config map with a different content and mount again same way? I already mounting, but I will create a config map with a different content, different configurations. Now, before I go for a liveness probe and readiness probe, let's discuss about this concept also. Liveness probe and readiness probe. Before I go for this, let's discuss about one more concept here: private registries. Are we going to host, are we going to maintain our application images, whatever we are creating for our actual applications, are we going to maintain in the public repositories? No. Are you going to maintain in a private repositories like Nexus or JFrog, ECR, like this, or GCR, Google Container Registry, Azure Container Registry, like this? Now, if it is a private registry, does your Kubernetes needs to be authenticated with those registries to pull the images? Your Kubernetes nodes needs to be authenticated with private registries. Now let's say I don't have any Nexus or JFrog. Guys, even though you use Nexus and JFrog, by default, is it a secure registry? No, because as of now, you guys have not configured any certificates. So Nexus or JFrog, if you use to host the Docker images, on which protocol the Nexus is running? As of now, if you create a Docker hosted repositories, HTTP. If it is HTTP, insecure registry, does that Docker or Kubernetes will support authenticating with insecure registries by default? Even though you use a username and password on that URL, it is not going to support that insecure repositories. In that case, if you are using insecure repositories, do you need to tweak some configurations in the respective runtime? If you are using Docker, in the Docker configurations, you need to tweak, you need to allow Docker to work with insecure repositories. You need to modify that. If I am using Kubernetes containerd, in the containerd also, do I need to modify some configurations if I want to use insecure repositories? Yes. But in real time, are we going to have HTTPS configured for your Nexus and JFrog also? If you are using Nexus and JFrog, you are going to have a HTTPS configured for Nexus and JFrog also. If I am using secure repository, like the repositories which is secured using HTTPS, SSL and TLS, then do I need to tweak any configurations to Docker or containerd to work with that repositories? No. Not required. If you are running on HTTPS, not required. You don't need to tweak any configurations in the Docker or containerd software to work with the Nexus and JFrog if it is running on HTTPS. If it is running on HTTP, then insecure registries, then do I need to tweak some configurations in the Dockers and Kubernetes? Yes. Suppose if I am using cluster, do I need to tweak that in each and every node in my cluster? Suppose I'm using Docker Swarm or I'm using Kubernetes. Do I need to tweak those configurations in the respective runtime to work with each and every server? I need to make changes to work with insecure registry. So for now, what I am using, I am not going to use Nexus or JFrog. If you want to use Nexus and JFrog, then you need to tweak some configurations. But in real time, it is not required because are you going to have Nexus and JFrog also configured with HTTPS? Yes. So I don't want to waste much time over there. So that's why I'm not using HTTP or HTTPS. Sorry, I'm not using Nexus and JFrog for now. Even though I'm using Docker Hub, can I create one private repository? Only one. It is going to allow to have only one private repository in the Docker Hub. Only one private repository in the Docker Hub. Now, I have a Docker Hub account. I already have a Docker Hub account, and in fact, everyone has a Docker Hub account. Now within this Docker Hub, can I create a repository, one private repository? Now I already created. Now let me show that. I logged into my Docker Hub. This is my repositories in the Docker Hub. When I click on private repository, it is going to show. Suppose you want to create one repository like this. It is going to show whether it is public or private. So there is a public and private. Why this private I am not able to select? This radio button is not enabled because you are using Docker Hub for free. With free tier, I mean to say like free service. How many private repositories you can have? Only one. So do I already have one repository? Do I already have one private repository created in this? Yes. Now if you see, most of the things are public. This is public, this is public, this is public. Now here, do I have one private? Do I have one private repository? This one. Do I have one private repository? This one. Can I see that as a private? Now, this is private repository. I have one image here. Tag 1. Now let me use this repository to deploy. My application. Maybe let me use this. Now I am using that repository. That is not a public repository. Now that is a private repository. Okay. Multiple lines it is copied. Let me fix this. Now it's a private repository. Now I want to deploy this application. Whether it's a pod, whether it's a deployment, that doesn't matter here, guys. Whether it's you are directly creating a pod, whether you are creating this one using deployment, that doesn't matter. I'm using private repository. To avoid the confusion, maybe let's use a deployment only. Because this won't change whether you are creating a pod or deployment or replica set, these concepts will not change. Labels I don't want for this deployment. If you add also, that's fine. Now here, this is my deployment manifest, right? So I'll say replicas. Otherwise, let's see if I have some file. Let's see if I already have some file. Why to waste? VI maven web app deployment YML is there. Now let's say here I am using that image. Here I am using that private repository. The repository name is this. The registry name is Docker hands-on. Within that registry, this is the repository. I have a tag called 1. Now all these things doesn't matter for you, whether you are creating one replica, 3 replicas, whether you have a HPA, you don't have a HPA, all this doesn't matter now. You already know all these things. Now let me apply this one. kubectl apply -f maven web app deployment in test namespace, because that is deployed in test namespace. Now you see the errors. Now what error I have, guys? Error image full. Now do I have an image full backup? Now since I have a HPA, also, I created a HPA also. How many replicas I expected? Minimum 2 replicas. One is showing in image full backup. Another one is showing in pending state. Why? Because while requesting, am I using that resources concept here? Am I using that resources concept, resource request and limits? It is able to assign, node to only one pod, and again that pod has a problem. Image pull backup. Why this is in pending state? This pod is not able to, Kubernetes is not able to assign any node to this pod because you don't have enough CPU memory. Because of that, it is still in a pending state. Even though you have a resources, again will it end up in image pull backup? Once it is scheduled also, when it is assigned that node also, will it end up in image pull backup again? Because I am not using the correct tags. Sorry, I'm using the private registry. Now I am using correct tags only. I'm using correct tags, correct attributes. I mean to say registry, repository, everything is perfect. Now why I have image pull backup? Let's see. Now error image pull. Failed to pull the image. Failed to pull an image. It might be, it is saying repository does not exist or may require authorization. It is saying repository might not exist or require authorization. Is the first one true? Is the repository doesn't exist? Did I give a valid repository? Yes. Valid registry, valid repository. The first case is not correct. It is to do with second case. Now, is Kubernetes is failed to authenticate? I mean to say, does it requires authentication to pull that image? Because it's a private image. Now, how do you handle this? Do I need to execute Docker login in each and every servers? First of all, do I have a Docker installed? Do I have a Docker running in my Kubernetes nodes? No. You no need to execute Docker login also. Even though you are using Docker, you no need to execute Docker login in each and every server. So I can create a secret for these credentials. Yesterday when I was explaining Kubernetes secrets, do I have a Docker registry type secrets also? The way we have a OPAQ, TLS. Similarly, do I have a secret of type Docker registry? So can I create a secret with my credentials? Can I use that secret as an image pull secret? Can I use that secret as an image pull secret in my pod so that it will use that image pull secrets to pull the images? Now, you can authenticate private registry in Kubernetes. Right? So there is a concept here. You need to create a secrets. Go to the official website only. To pull an image from private registry. So I have a Kubernetes cluster. I have the private registry also. Now create a secret based on the existing credentials. Can I create a secret like this? kubectl create secret, but not this one. I am not going to use this type. I am going to use Docker registry type. Secret. Can I create a secret like this? Imperatively also you can do, declaratively also you can do. kubectl secret Docker registry. This is your secret name. Whatever name you want to give, you can give. This is your secret name. Docker registry secret. Now here, can I give my registry URL? Can I give my registry URL, username, password? This email ID is not mandatory. Let's say you are using Nexus repository. Can I give something like this here? Because in real time you will have a host names or domain names also like this, nexus.tcs.com. Let's say this is you are working in TCS, you have a Nexus running in for TCS, and that is mapped with this kind of a internal domain name or host name. Can I give like this, nexus.tcs.com? Here Nexus URL, like whatever, like admin 123 or whatever your password. This email ID is not mandatory. If you want to leave it. Now, can I create a secret like this? Can I create a secret like this? Secret name, I will give something like Nexus, Docker, Cred, something like this. I'll create a secret of type Docker registry. Then once I have this secret in my pods, in my pod manifest, where I want to deploy, you can, that is in a pod spec, guys. Whether you are directly creating a pod, whether you are creating a replication controller, replica set, daemon set, can I use these options? Whatever comes under pod spec here. So something like this I will use. Under container section, I mean to say under this pod spec, sibling to your containers and volumes, can I have something like this? Image pull secret. Can I give this secret name, whatever I have given, whatever I have created in my Kubernetes? Now, does this image pull secret information will be sent to the node, because your scheduler is assigning a node to the pod. Is this information will be sent to that kubelet which is running in that node, to whatever node that pod is scheduled? Is your Kubernetes will send this secret information to that kubelet? Is that kubelet is going to use these secrets to authenticate with that respective registry? Is that kubelet is going to use, is kubelet is going to use these credentials to authenticate with that registry? Yes. So this way we can do. Now I don't have any Nexus JFrog like that. I will use Docker Hub only. For Docker Hub, is this mandatory again? If you don't pass any server details, what is the registry it will authenticate while creating a secret? This is optional. Guys. That is not the URL. hub.docker.com is not registry URL. Don't think this is the URL to pull the image from the Docker Hub. Don't think this is the URL. So there is a different URL called something like, let me show, docker.io something is there. Docker.io something is there. Let me see if I can show this one, guys. Index.docker.io. But again, this is not mandatory. If I remove this one also, what is the default one? You already know. What is the default registry it will authenticate? You should not give hub.docker.com. That is, you are accessing using UI, but this is the actual that registry URL for Docker Hub, index.docker.io/v1. Now I can create a registry like this. I mean to say, I can create a secret like this. I can create a secret like this. If it is a Docker Hub, I can create a secret like this. So this is this one, my credentials, my username, Docker hands-on, my password, whatever password, something like this. This is optional. I'll say Docker Hub, something like this, Docker Hub cred. Now, can I use this credential in my pod manifest as an image pull secret? This one, if that is from this, I will do something like this. Now, let me create a secret. This registry secret, I need to see whether it will work in a namespace level or whether it will work in a cluster level. Let me do that. Now, let me create the secret as is. If I create a secret as is, in which namespace the secret will be created? Without mentioning the namespace, in which namespace this will be created? Default. Let's do that. For now, I'm stopping the screen share for some time because I don't want to reveal my Docker Hub password. I'm stopping the screen share for a minute. Let me share my screen back. Now I created a secret. I created a secret of type. Darker type. Now why it is secret? You can understand why it is secret. Why not it is a config map? Because can I consider this also confidential data? This Docker Hub, this registry credentials also. Yes. So I created a secret. Now if I use that secret, now I created that secret in a default namespace. I created that secret in a default namespace. Now in my pod manifest, guys, to demonstrate, let's remove all these things. I will demonstrate with only one replica. I don't have enough sources here. Can I mention that as here, that image pull secrets, that instruction whatever they have given, like this image pull secrets. Now I am mentioning in my pod manifest that image pull secrets, name of the secret, whatever name you have created. What is the name of the secret? This is the secret name. I am using that. Now let me deploy. But before deploying, let me delete all these applications because I don't have enough space, enough memory in the cluster, so it is not working. Let me delete everything in that namespace. Now let me apply. Now I am using a secret. Kubectl apply -f that application maven web app deployment .aml. Now if you see, let's see whether it's this Docker Hub credentials. Let's see. Still it is not using because that is namespace specific. Because it's a config map, secret, right? So it works in a namespace level only. Now I am trying to deploy that image in test namespace, but I have a config map, that secret created in a different namespace. It is not able to refer. So let me create a secret. In this namespace. That image, Docker registry credentials, let me create in this namespace. While executing that command, can I use -n that namespace? While executing the command, can I use that -n and namespace name? Even though I am doing imperatively, while executing this command, can I use -n that namespace name? Yes. Now I created a secret. In this namespace -n test -ns. There is a secret now. Now let me see now that image pull backup is there. Now let me delete and redeploy. Let me delete that deployment. Now let me apply kubectl apply -f that maven web app deployment .aml. I have deleted. I am redeploying again. Now this time I have a secret, image pull secret created. Now is it using those secret? Now Kubernetes is assigned one scheduler, is assigned one node to that pod. Kubernetes scheduler assigned one node, this node. The scheduler assigned this node to this pod. Now the kubelet which is running in that node has executed some commands. Is that scheduler pass that secret whatever we have created to authenticate with registry? Since we are using that as an image pull secret, is that the kubelet is using that secret to authenticate and pull the image? Now if you see, It is successfully pull that image, because why in pod manifest did I pass that image pull secret also? Did I pass that image pull secret also in my pod manifest? Yes. So this way, will I able to use private images also to be deployed in Kubernetes? Yes. Now, if it is a ECR, if it is a ECR and EKS cluster, in a different way it works. If it is a ECR and EKS, it will work in a different way. You have a EKS cluster. Let's consider you have a EKS Kubernetes cluster. It's a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's a managed Kubernetes cluster, EKS cluster, and you have images in ECR. You have images in ECR. Let's say this is your ECR. Here it works in a different way. You no need to create secrets like that also. Now, while creating a nodes for your EKS cluster, if I attach that ECR read-only policies, that ECR container registry read-only policies, I attach to that role. That role is attached to these nodes. In that role, I have attached that permissions, ECR container registry read-only. So since these nodes already have a permissions, ECR container registry read-only permissions, will it able to pull the images from ECR? The nodes, these are my EKS node. If this node has one IAM role, if this node has one IAM role already attached, that IAM role has this policy attached, EC2 container registry read-only policy, let's say. Now this server already has that EC2 container registry read-only permission. You no need to create a secret and pass that as a image pull secret if you have a EKS cluster and your images are there in ECR. But if your images are there in Nexus, if your images are there in Nexus like this, then do I need to follow the same process here? Do I need to create a secret for your next excuse me, do I need to create a secret for this Nexus credential? Then then do I need to use that secret as a image pull secret in my pod manifest? Okay, is everyone clear how to use private registries or private images? Whether it's a ECR, whether it's a GCR, Nexus, does these concepts will change your Kubernetes concepts like secrets, image pull secrets, deployment, replica sets, daemon sets, liveness probes, readiness probes, volumes, config maps, secrets, it is remains same. Now is everyone clear, guys? We came a long distance in Kubernetes. We started with Kubernetes architecture. What is Kubernetes? Why we need Kubernetes? Advantages of Kubernetes. Now it's kind of a middle, like mid-year review. In offices, your manager will review your performance like quarterly, mid-year. Now, like I am middle of Kubernetes, now I want to review. Is everyone clear? Whatever we discussed so far, is everyone clear? We started with Kubernetes architecture, advantages of Kubernetes architecture, components. Components, or we call it as an objects, or we call it as a resources, or we call it as a workloads, all are same. Like pod. Before we start this, we discussed about namespace. Namespace. What is namespace? Why do we need namespace? All these things. Pod. Within this, we have a single container pod. What do you mean by single container pod? What do you mean by multi-container pod? And also we discussed about static pod. What do you mean by static pod? Now, the most important thing here is one more concept we discussed about is service. Service. Within this service, so far we discussed about cluster IP, we discussed about node port. Now, there is another type of service called headless service is there, load balancer service is there. This we will discuss later. What is this? These two we will discuss later. Now, after this, we started understanding how within pod how containers can communicate, how one pod can communicate with other pod within the cluster same namespace, how one pod can communicate with other pod within a cluster in two different namespaces. All these things we discussed, like FQDN, what is FQDN and all those things. Later we started understanding RC, RS, DS, deployment. In deployment we discussed a lot of stuff. Later we discussed about volumes like persistent volume claims. Then we started understanding config maps and secrets like this. So it is like a middle of Kubernetes. We have a lot of concepts to be discussed. Is everyone clear whatever we discussed so far, all these things? What do you mean by PV, PVC, config map, secrets, deployments, replica sets, all these things? Now, we have still lot of concepts like this. Liveness probe, and readiness probe, liveness probe, and readiness probe. Then we have something like network policies. Network policies are there. We have scheduling. What do you mean by scheduling? I want to control how my parts get scheduled. In the Docker Swarm, when I was discussing, using labels and constraints, was I able to control how my containers get scheduled in the Docker Swarm cluster? Using the Docker Swarm labels and selectors, same thing. Here also, I want to control how my pods get scheduled, because you are not directly scheduling your containers. Containers are getting scheduled with the help of pods. So how my pods get scheduled, I want to control that. Here we have a lot of options like node selector, node affinity, pod affinity, pod anti-affinity, taints, tolerations, drain, cardon, uncardon. You have these scheduling features. We have network policies. Similarly, there are a lot of concepts. We are just middle of Kubernetes. Now actual advanced concepts will come here. So once this is done, we will discuss about ingress controller. All these things will come. Slowly we'll understand all these things. Now let's focus on this liveness probe and readiness probe. What do you mean by this liveness probe and readiness probe? By default, is Kubernetes is going to perform the health on the application which is running in your container, which is running in your pod container? Is it going to perform any kind of health check on that application which is running in your Kubernetes pod container? No. So Kubernetes will not perform any health check on your pod container, on your application which is running in your pod container. So by default, it is going to just verify whether the process, whatever process you are trying to run, whether that process is running or not, but within that process, is my application is reachable or accessible? Is your application is reachable or accessible? Is it healthy? Is it going to do some that kind of a health checks by default? No. So by default, it will just check the process, whether that process is running or not. But do you have, sometimes even though your process is running, your Java process or Tomcat process is running, but do you have a chance that your application may not healthy, your application may not respond to the requests? There is a chance that your application may not respond to the request. You have some, like, just to give an example, deadlock situations. Your process is in a deadlock situation, your application is in a deadlock situation. What is meant by deadlock? One process is waiting on the other process, and other process is also waiting on the same process, like that. deadlocks in situation. So are you going to get a response like that? If you have that deadlock issues, memory leakage, you have a memory leakage. And memory leakage in the sense, if you are working on Java, you might be heard about JVMs, heap memory. So your objects heap memory has to be garbage collected after that objects are created and used. That heap memory has to be garbage collected, but you have not written the code properly. There is a chance that your objects are not garbage collected. There is a memory leakage. So in that case, you will have some issues. Your applications may not work as expected. So if you have these type of scenarios, even though process is running, do you think your application will respond? No. If your application is not healthy, if your application is not healthy, does that container will not, does that container will be restarted automatically by default? Does that process gets restarted by default? If your application is not healthy, no. Is that parts gets removed from service endpoints by default? Is that parts gets removed from that service endpoints from default if that application is not healthy? No. So do we have issues? If we have this scenario, happened in our Kubernetes, our application containers, our pods, do we have issues? Do we have issues basically? Yes. Now we can perform the health on the application using liveness probe and readiness probe in Kubernetes. We can perform the health on the application using liveness probe and readiness probe in Kubernetes. Just to make things simple, when we are discussing in AWS ELB concept, we deployed our applications as a servers. We deployed our applications in the VMs directly, in the VMs. Now, is ELB has a capability of performing the health checks? Just to make things simple, don't compare these two together. Don't compare these two, ELB with liveness probe and readiness probe. Just I'm trying to explain one concept here. Is ELB has a capabilities of performing the health checks on the application? Some people are saying no. Guys, remember, we have NLB, network load balancer, we have ALB, application load balancer. NLB doesn't support application health checks, but does ALB support application health checks, checking the health on the application itself? Now, why it is performing health checks? If health check is failed, what ELB is trying to do basically is that server will be removed from this ELB targets. I mean to say, is it going to start sending the traffic to that server where your application is not healthy? Does ELB will start sending the traffic where your application is not healthy? Does ELB will start sending the traffic if where your application is not healthy? No. So is it using some kind of health checks to determine whether that application is healthy or not? This one, yes. Now similarly, I have a Kubernetes. How we are routing the traffic, whether it is coming from inside the cluster or outside the cluster, is the traffic is routed via that service. We have a Kubernetes service. Now, service is routing the traffic to the pod. Now let's consider your pod is running. Your container is also running within the pod, but that application is not healthy. It is not responding to the request. By default, is that pod will be removed from the service endpoints? Service has endpoints. By default, will it be removed? No. If it is not removed, if that application is not responding, let's say request is coming from outside the cluster or request is coming from inside the cluster, that doesn't matter. Other application is trying to reach. inside the cluster other application or outside the cluster request is coming, if the request goes to that pod where my application is not healthy, if the request goes to that pod where my application is not healthy, do we have a problem? Is my application is down? Is my application is accessible? If the request goes to the pod where my application is not healthy, do we have a problem here? Whether it's an internal call or external call, if the request is going to this pod and my application is not healthy in this pod, do we get a response back from that application, that container? No. So do we have a problem here? Do we have a problem here if this case happened? Yes. Now, if that application is not accessible because some kind of issues like a deadlock situation or memory leakage, most of the cases, if that process gets restarted, if that application gets restarted or if that process gets restarted, do we have those issues resolved? Most of the case, 99%, if that process gets restarted, if that container gets restarted, do we have those issues resolved automatically, the deadlock or memory leakage? Yes. So is it going to restart automatically now by default the way we have done so far? No. Now, how to handle these scenarios in Kubernetes? That is where these two comes into picture. That is where these two comes into picture. That is liveness probe and readiness probe. Liveness probe and readiness probe. So before I go for this liveness probe and readiness probe, I may not simulate that deadlock scenario. I may not simulate that deadlock scenario, or I may not simulate that memory leakage scenario. Let me demonstrate by doing some approaches here. Now let's see what applications I have. Let's see what application I have. This Maven web application. Maybe let's deploy with two replicas. I'll deploy this one with two replicas now. I'll deploy this one with two replicas. Two replicas I'm deploying just to demonstrate that one. Now I have a two pods. I have a two pods. HPA expected is 2. Now let's see. I should have a two pods. Now do I have a two pods? I mean to say two applications, two replicas are running. As of now, there is a service for that application. As of now, there is a service for that application. If you see kubectl describe SVC, I am describing this service. Now, how many endpoints that service has? How many endpoints that service has? You can directly do this using kubectl get EP. You can directly get that kubectl get EP. How many endpoints that service has? Two endpoints. Now, whether we are accessing internally or externally via this service, does request goes to these two parts like that? Does that service does the load balancing between these two parts? Now both applications are healthy. Let's say I am using curl only. Since I am already inside my Kubernetes nodes, I am using this service IP. I am not creating any temporary pod. Now let's see what is my application context. It's redirecting. Let me use slash. Now I am getting a response from this one 10.40.02. That is one of the pod. That is one of the pod. That is one of the pod. So I have customized that code. Now I am getting 10.40.0.2 from, sometimes I am getting from this one. Let me again do multiple times. I may get a response from this one also. 38.0.2. Now is it giving 38.0.2, which means when I'm accessing via service, is it doing some kind of a load balancing, sometimes 40, sometimes 38? Is it kind of a doing a load balancing? Now both parts are healthy. Both parts are healthy. Now I am not able to simulate that scenario, the deadlock scenario. What I am going to do, I am going to intentionally delete that var file. I am going to intentionally delete that var file within this pod container because I am not able to produce that deadlock scenario or all those things. Now I am intentionally, I am going to delete that application, that var file itself from this pod container. So in the user local Tomcat web apps folder, the namespace also. Intentionally, I am deleting that var file from one of the pod, this pod. Intentionally, I am deleting because I am not able to reproduce that. I am not able to produce that deadlock or that memory leakage scenario. I am removing that var file intentionally. Is your application itself is not available. Your application itself is not available in this application, in this pod, in this pod, in that pod. In this pod, I have deleted. That is in this one. Now, if you see that application itself is not there. I cannot simulate that scenario. That's why I have done this way. Now, is my application running in that in that pod? No. Now, if you see, if you see, 1 second, I will use the -n option. If you see that application itself, there is not there. Now, if you see, pod is still running. By default, is it checking the application API or application context, whether it is testing whether that application context is healthy or not? As of now, by default, is it checking? No. So it is not doing anything. Is it just checking whether that process is running or not? Whatever process you wanted to have in that pod, in that container? Yes. But now process is running, Tomcat is running, but my application is not there. If you see, do I still have the endpoints? When I see that service endpoints, do I still have those two endpoints? Do I have still that 38 and 40? Still it is there. Now parts are still running. It is showing it is ready also. Nothing is restarted. Now when I access via service now, do I have some problems now? Sometimes if the request goes to this pod where my application is not there, am I going to some kind of errors now? Now if you see, am I getting 404 now? Am I getting 404 now? Because that application itself is not there. I have intentionally deleted, but this can happen for deadlock scenario or memory leakage also. Your application may not respond quickly. Now sometimes I am getting 404, sometimes I am getting a response. When the request is going to other pod, I am getting a response. If request is going for that one more pod where my application is not healthy, am I getting 404? Then how to tackle these type of things? How to tackle these type of things in Kubernetes? Now, if my application is not healthy, that application, that pod should be removed from your service endpoint. If your pod, your application is not healthy in that pod has to be removed from service endpoint. If someone removes, that pod, this pod from the list of endpoints from the service, if it has only this endpoint, the service will always route to this pod. If someone removes this endpoint, always service routes to this pod. I don't want my application to be routed to the unhealthy pod. That is one use case. And I want my application process to be restarted if my application is not healthy. So to tackle these type of things, in Kubernetes, we have a concept called liveness probe and readiness probes. Sometimes they'll ask, what are the probes? What are the probes you have in Kubernetes? Or what do you mean by probes? What do you mean by probes, or what are the probes? Probes are nothing but kind of a health checks. What are the probes we have in Kubernetes? Liveness probe and readiness probe. Now what is this probe? Now let's understand, what do you mean by liveness probe? What do you mean by readiness probe? What do you mean by liveness probe? What do you mean by readiness probe? Let's understand now. Guys, if you guys went through the interview questions, whatever we already shared, are you guys seeing 99% of the questions has been already discussed or we are discussing? We already shared lot of questions. You self attended lot of interviews. 99% of the questions we already discussed or we are going to cover in the future sessions also. So if you understand the concept, if you follow the concepts, will be able to easily crack the interview, will be able to easily manage your work also without proxy, without support. But you need to attend, you need to practice, you need to understand. But if you only by heart interview questions, if you only focusing on the interview questions, by hearting the comments or questions, if straightforward, if the interviewer asks, you will be able to answer. But if the interviewer asks in a different way, the way I have explained, I have like this is happening, I don't want my service to route the traffic to that pod, I want my pods to be restarted, I mean to say that containers to be restarted. If you have this case, then you have a trouble, you have a problem explaining the answer. But if you practiced all these things, if you have attended all the classes, if you practiced each and every topic, whatever we have discussed, it will be simple. Now, let's continue because it's already too late for the people who are not at all attending. Now, let's understand this liveness probe and readiness probe. Let's understand this liveness probe and readiness probe. So, liveness probe and readiness probe are used to control the health of the application running inside pod container. Can I check the health of the application which is running inside my pod container using this liveness probes and readiness probes? Yes. But both are health checks. Both are health checks, but how different these two with each other? Both we will use to perform the health check, but what is the difference between this liveness probe and readiness probe? How different it is with each other? Both are performing the health checks only, but what? Liveness probe. It is also health check. Suppose a pod is running in our application inside a container. Our application is running inside my pod inside a container due to some reason. Let's say memory leakage, CPU usage, or application deadlock situations. Your application is not responding to the request. Your application is not responding to the request and it is stuck in a error state. So using liveness probe, I can check the health of the application. For some reason, if that liveness probe, if that health check fail, if that liveness probe fails, what it does? If the liveness probe fails, what it does? If I have a liveness probe defined and that health check is failed, what it does? It will restart the process. It will restart the container. If it is going to restart the container, it is like a fresh copy of your application again. It is like a fresh copy of your application again because your container is restarted. So most of the cases, is it going to auto resolve these deadlock situations or memory leak situations? For some time, yes, it is going to restart the container. But is this liveness probe will remove that pod from service endpoints? Suppose this liveness probe is failed, is this liveness probe will communicate with Kubernetes to remove that pod IP from the service endpoint? Is it going to ask the endpoint controllers to remove that endpoint from that list of endpoints from that service if the liveness probe is failed? No. Liveness probe will just what it does maximum, if the health check is failed, liveness probe will just restart. The way we have a liveness probe, there is another probe called readiness probe. Another probe called readiness probe. So this readiness probe is used to detect. It is used to detect if container is ready to, if the container is ready to accept the traffic, whether it is ready to accept the traffic or not. For some reason, this readiness probe is not successful. If this readiness probe is not successful, Is it going to show, even though it is showing running state, is it going to show like one by one? If that readiness probe is failed, if that readiness probe is failed, is it going to show something like, one by one? Even though pod is showing in running state, will it show one by one if the readiness probe is failed? No, it is not going to show ready. It is not going to show as ready. So even though your application pod is running, your process is running, suppose you have a readiness probe defined, your application health checks are not successful, your readiness probes are not successful, will it be shown as ready here? Will it be shown as one by one? If I have a readiness probe and readiness probe is failed, will it show one by one if the readiness probes are failed? No, it is going to show 0 by 1. It is going to show 0 by 1. Now, if the readiness probe is used to detect if the container is ready to accept the traffic, you can use this probe to manage which parts are used as a backends for your service, which parts are used as a endpoints for your service. If pod is not ready, if the readiness probe is failed, which means if the pod is not ready, if the readiness probe is failed, then does this readiness probe will remove the list of that pod IP from the service endpoints? If the readiness probe is failed and if the pod is not ready, then does this readiness probe will remove that pod IP from the list of endpoints from that service endpoints? Yes. Readiness probe is used to detect if the pod is ready to accept the traffic or not. If the pod is ready to accept the traffic or not. As of now, do I have this readiness probe defined? As of now, do I have this readiness probe defined? No. Because of that, is it able to detect whether that application is healthy, whether that pod application is healthy or not? Is it removing that from endpoints, list of endpoints as of now? No. And do I have a liveness probe which will restart your container if the health check is failed? Do I have a liveness probe also? No. So is these two things happening now by default? Is these two things happening by default now? No. So Kubernetes supports liveness probes, readiness probes. What type of probes we can use? I mean to say again, this liveness probes, readiness probes supports different types of different way of checking the health. It supports different way of checking the health. One is executing a command. One is executing a command like this. One is executing a command. First option, executing a command. So if I define liveness probe and readiness probe like this with this option, if I have this liveness probe, readiness probes defined with this option, same way I can define readiness probe also. The way I have a liveness probe, I can define a readiness probe also. With these options, I can define readiness probe also. One option is executing a command. One option is executing a command. Now, if I have my pod like this, if I have my container like this, can I define the liveness probe and readiness probe for my applications, my containers? This is at a container level. This is at a container level. If I have a multi-container applications, can I use this liveness probe and readiness probes for all those containers individually as per that application which is running in that container? Yes. This is at a container level. Executing a command. This is one option. exec, executing a command. What is this period seconds? What do you mean by this period seconds? How frequently? How frequently it has to perform that health check? So now here value is given as 5. How frequently this health check will be executed on that container? Every 5 seconds. Now we have an initial delay seconds. We have an initial delay seconds. What do you mean by initial delay seconds? When the pod is scheduled for the first time, when the pod is scheduled for the first time, when your pod is getting created, if it is going to start performing the health checks immediately, do you think your application will be fully ready? No. your application will not be fully ready. When you are creating your pod, does that pod will take some time to fully set up? Pod will be assigned to node. That node will pull the container. That node will pull the image to create a container. So if I start performing the health checks immediately, initially, if I start performing the health checks immediately, do you think these health checks will be successful? Initially, immediately, if you do? No. Now, we need to wait for some time initially, based on how much time your application is taking. Now, initially, let's say, if I say something like this, my pod is scheduled, is it going to start immediately after 5th seconds? Is it going to start at 5th second? If I have something like this, is it going to start performing the health check at 5th second? Even though period seconds is 5, is it going to start at 5th second? No. Is it going to start at 65th second? Is it going to start at 65th, 5th second? Because initial delay is 60 seconds. So, but once this initial delay is over, is it going to start performing every 5 seconds like 65th, 70th, 75th, 80th, like that? Yes. Guys, these type of issues also we will face. Recently, the developer, one of the developer has defined the liveness probes and readiness probe, but he has given 0. Initial delay seconds 0, he has given. Initial delay seconds 0, period seconds he has given 5. So the moment the pod is scheduled, immediately it is starting performing the health check. So pod is initial delay seconds he has given 0, and he has given like this, period seconds 5. So immediately it is started performing the health check. Do you think that health checks become successful anytime? It is like an infinite loop. It is like an infinite loop. What is happening? There is a liveness probe also. Liveness probe also getting performed every 5 seconds, starting with 0 second. Now this will fail. Does liveness probe will restart your container? Does liveness probe will restart your container because it is failed? And again, it is not waiting any time. It is not waiting any time. Again, it is performing at 5th seconds. Again, will it fail? Your pod is recreated, your pod is restarted, sorry, not pod, your container is restarted, and again within 5 seconds it is performing the health check. Again, will it become successful? The pod is restarted, but again at 5th seconds, again the health check. Do you think it will become successful anytime? It is keep restarting the containers. It is keep restarting the containers like an infinite loop. We are getting a crash loop backup. We are getting a crash loop backup. That consumer, that user, that guy is saying my application is keep getting restarted. When we troubleshoot, when we debug, we identify that he has given wrongly. So do I need to give some buffer time initially? Like, that depends on how much time your container is taking initially. That can be 30 seconds, that can be 60 seconds. Can I even give 120 seconds also initially? That depends on your application startup time. How much time your application is taking to start. That is depends on your application startup time. Now this is initial delay. What do you mean by this period seconds? Whether it is in a liveness probe or readiness probe, that doesn't matter. What do you mean by this period seconds? How frequently? How frequently? Now, what do you mean by this executing a command option? What do you mean by this executing a command option? So is this command gets executed on the container? Is it internally? Is kubernetes going to do something like this? Internally, is it going to execute something like this command on that pod, on that container? Internally, is it going to do something like this internally? Is this command gets executed on that pod container internally? Who is going to perform these liveness probes and readiness probes? Who is going to execute this health checks? The kubelet. The kubelet. Now, if it is a command, how come whether it will determine whether this is successful or failure? If it is a command, Bhaskar sir might have already explained what is the code will be considered as successful when you are executing any command. This command will return. This is not a HTTP call. This is not a HTTP call. This is a command. Is it like a HTTP call? This is not a HTTP call. This is just one normal command. So what is the code which will be considered as successful? 127? No, guys. 0. 0. If the command succeeds, it returns 0. If the command succeeds, what is the status code that returns? I mean to say, what is the code it returns? That exit code? 0. So if that command is successfully executed, if it is returning 0, then does that liveness probe or readiness probe is going to be considered as successful by kubelet? Is kubelet is going to consider that is successful if it is returning 0 on that command? Yes. If it is not returning 0, if the command returns any value other than 0, if the command returns any value other than 0, then if it is a liveness probe, if it is using a command option, executing a command option, it is not returning 0, then the kubelet will kill the container and restart it, because it is going to consider that is failed. Kubelet will kill the container and restart the container. Same thing, readiness probe. If the readiness probe also expect same thing, if the readiness probe is failed, is it going to consider that pod, that container is not ready, and is it going to remove that pod from the list of service endpoints? Yes. This is executing a command. This is executing a command. What is the other option you have? Instead of executing a command option, can I perform HTTP health checks like this? Can I perform HTTP health checks? One is executing a command. This is one way of performing the health check. First option. First option is performing executing a command. Can I perform HTTP get calls? HTTP get calls, kind of a HTTP health checks on my application like this. Can I do something like this? Whether it's a liveness probe, whether it's a readiness probe, whether it's a liveness probe, whether it's a readiness probe, can I perform this HTTP health checks like this? Like period seconds, initial delay seconds. One more thing is there. One more is there. Timeout seconds. What do you mean by timeout seconds here? What do you mean by timeout seconds? You have a timeout seconds also. Here also you can use the timeout. The timeout seconds is there. What do you mean by timeout? If this is not responding, it is going to perform the health on this application context on this port. If it is not responding within this much time, within 5 seconds, it is not responding. It is responding at 6th, 6th second, 8th second, 10th second, like that also. Is it going to consider that as a healthy? If it is not responding within 5 seconds, is it going to consider as healthy? No. So this timeout seconds, kind of a SLA. You are expecting that to be responded within some time. Now, this is sample. Is it always like this? Path is always like this. Port is always like this. This headers is always like this. This is just a sample. Now, as per your application context, as per the application context within that container, will I able to check the health on my application? This headers is not mandatory. This headers is not mandatory. If your application is expected to pass some headers, you can pass. Otherwise, you can remove that. Now, in my current case, can I take like this? My application context maven-web application, the port, on which port that process, that container is running. As of now, in which port that container is running, that port is running for my application 8080. Now here also, can I do something like this? Can I do something like this? Based on your requirement, you can define that initial delay seconds, period seconds, like that. Initial delay 30 or 60, based on your requirement. Period seconds also, if you want, liveness readiness probes to be performed by every 10 second, or this liveness probe has to be performed by every 30 seconds, like this. That is up to you. Now this is HTTP. If it is a HTTP GET calls, what is the code? How kubelet will consider whether that is healthy or not? What it will expect if it is a HTTP GET call? So it will expect what status code? Any code, any code greater than to 200, any code greater than to 200 and less than to 400, less than to 400 is considered as what? Any code greater than 200 and less than to 400 is considered as what in HTTP success. So 200 is okay. HTTP status codes 200 is okay. 200 okay. 201, what do you mean by 201? It is saying like created. 301 you have. What do you mean by 301? Redirected. It is redirecting to some other URL. Can I consider all these things as a success codes? 200, 201, 301 like that. But if 400, what do you mean by 400, 401, 403? You have a 500, 502, 503. All these things are different. This is something to do with request, bad request. This is something to do with application errors. 500 internal server error, 502 bad gateway, service not available. If any code we are getting like above 400, can it, is it going to consider this as a failure? Any code which is coming above 500, is it going to consider as a failure? Above 400, anything? Yes. But any code greater than or equals to 200 and less than 400, it is not also equals. Any code comes within greater than or equals 200 and less than 400, is it going to consider as a successful? Yes. This is another way of performing the health checks. What is the other one? TCP checks, kind of a port checks, kind of a telnet on that respective container and respective port. This is another one. TCP socket, kind of a in the network load balancer, it is performing, right? In the AWS network load balancer, it is performing the port check whether that port is responding or not. Kind of a telnet on that container IP, on that pod IP and port, like a port type of health checks. TCP health checks, just connection level, transport level checking. But is it going to check the health on the application level? If I use this TCP socket, it is going to just check whether that port is responding or not, kind of a telnet on that port. So this one is TCP sockets. But most of the cases, which one we will use? Because we are going to host our applications, that can be your web application or that can be your APIs, REST-based APIs. Most of the times, what type of health checks will be used? Most of the times we will use HTTP health checks. But let's say you have some stateful applications like databases, kind of a databases or some other like a RabbitMQ, Kafka. In that case, can I use any health check like TCP socket check, or can I use some custom command to determine whether my database is healthy or not, like that? If I have some different types of applications running in Kubernetes as a pods, like a databases or any other software, database software will not have application context. So can I use different way of checking the health of the database pod, database containers, using this executing command option by customizing that command or TCP sockets? Yes. So this is how we can perform the health checks. This is how we can perform the health checks. As of now, do I have those health checks defined for any applications, whatever we deployed? Whatever applications we deployed, not only this application. Do I have these type of probes defined here? No. That's why it is not working. That's why it is not working. Now, let me define the probes. Let me define the probes as per your requirement. As per your requirements. Guys, crash loop backup will happen for many reasons, not only for liveness probe, readiness probe. Your application your application process is not coming up because of there is a wrong configuration, wrong configurations or script in your code, it is stopping your applications to be started successfully, then again is Kubernetes is going to restart continuously, because process itself is not coming up successfully because of some wrong configuration scripts in your code. Process itself, that container process itself is not coming up successfully. Is Kubernetes going to do that kind of a starting that container and again? It is starting, it is not restarting. It is trying to start, that is not coming up, again it is starting. That is different. Here I am talking about different. Here I am performing the health check, the process is running but application is not working. So this is different case. Now I can perform the liveness probes, readiness probe as per your requirement. But is it always same? Is it always same the way I am defining here? Is it always same? Let's use here. Now, if I wrongly configure, as I already told recently, one of the user of my application, I mean to say one of the developer has wrongly defined the probes, it was causing issue. Is this correct? For this application, do you think this path, checking this path is correct? Now, you need to make sure you have the probes correctly. Now, if I give like this also, do you think will it work? Maven web app, if my application context is different? No, my application context is like this. It is redirecting, it is going to give 301, that is also fine. But if I want to continue with that redirection, can I give again forward slash something like this? Yes. Now here I am giving this one. Now intentionally I have given initial delay seconds as 60, period seconds for liveness probe 30, readiness probe 5 seconds or 10 seconds, like that I have given intentionally. Now let me deploy with these probes. Now let me deploy my application with these probes. Now I modified that one. I deployed this application with probes. Line number 40, there is a error. Guys, 2 minutes, I'll wrap up. I don't want to drag this anymore. Line number 40, there is a error because this is at a wrong location. No, this is at a correct location only. Here there is some hidden space. You have some hidden spaces here, so that's why it is giving the problem. Now this is fine. Now this is fine. Now let me apply that. Now this time I have a probes defined, kubectl get all -n test -ns. Now even though parts are showing in running state, why it is not showing one by one? Why it is still not reflecting in the 10 points? There is a service. Why the parts are not showing in that even though parts are running? Why it is showing that 0 by 1 even though it is running? Why still the parts are not showing in that services endpoints? Now it is performing the health checks. Now when it will be shown as ready? When it will be shown as ready? Once the readiness probe is successful, then only it will be shown as ready. Why it is not performing the health checks so far? Still it is not performing because of the initial delay second. Now initial delay second I have given 60. Now after 60 seconds, is it going to start performing the health check after every 5 seconds? No, I think I have given 10 seconds. Is it going to perform for every 10 seconds after some time? Now it is perform that health check. That health check is successful. Is it showing now one by one? Now can I see that in the list of endpoints? Can I see that in the list of endpoints pods? Both are healthy, both are fine. Now if there is any failure, if I describe my pod, will I able to see whether that any failure in the probes? If I describe my pod, I can see that issues. I can see that issues when I describe the pod. Or there is another thing called events. Events. kubectl get events. Events are nothing but what is happening in the background in your control plane. What is happening in the background in your control plane. So what your control plane is doing. In the background, it is showing something like this. What is happening in the control plane? This is getting scheduled. This pod is assigned to this node. Events. What events has happened in this namespace in the background by that control plane. You can see that failures here also. If you see the events, if there is any failure. Now my parts are fine. My parts are fine. There are endpoints also fine. I don't have any issues with my parts are running. Now I am able to access via that service. Via that service, I am able to access via that service. I am intentionally doing. I'm just accessing like this via service. Now both are healthy, both are ready. There are no issues. Now request is coming from this pod. Another time requesting is going to come from another pod also. Sometimes 38, sometimes 40. Now let me simulate the same scenario. Let me simulate the same scenario. Now intentionally I am deleting that application because I am not able to produce the deadlock situation. I am intentionally deleting that var file from one of the pod. From one of the pod, I'm intentionally deleting the var file. But this time, since I have a probes, is it going to do some kind of a checks and restart that container because liveness probe will fail? And readiness probe, is it going to remove that pod IP from that endpoint now? If I do this now, because I am not able to reproduce the deadlock situation, I am intentionally deleting that file, that var file from that pod, from that container. I am intentionally removing. Now intentionally I have kept some difference in the readiness probe and liveness probe. Intentionally I have kept. So readiness probe every 10 seconds it is performing. Every 10 seconds it is performing. Liveness probe I have intentionally kept every 30 seconds. Now this is removed. Now pod is showing as running. Service still have endpoints. Service still have endpoints, but this time I'm getting 404. But will it be automatically resolved once the readiness probe is successful? Once the readiness probe is failed, if that now is it going to remove that from list of endpoints? Now there are two. Now every 10 seconds it is going to perform. After it is identified that it is not healthy. Now do you see? Is it removed that pod from the list of endpoints now? Is that remove that pod from the list of endpoints? Now always I'll get that response from only that pod. This time do I have that 404 issue? Do I have 404 issue now? No. Now when I see my pods, it is showing like this 0 by 1 because readiness probe is failed. Readiness probe is failed. Then liveness probe comes into picture. Liveness probe comes into picture. I have a liveness probe. It is performing every 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds. After some time, if liveness probe identified that that is not healthy, is it going to restart? Can I see restart count will be 1 after some time? Now if you see, I still have only one pod in the list of endpoints. I have still only one pod in the list of endpoints. Now it is going to restart after that readiness liveness probe seconds. It is going to restart as per that liveness. Now can I see, is it restarted now? It's restarted completely, which means your container is completely recreated. Again, will I have that var file because container is recreated from your image? Will I have again that var file? I mean to say that application in that new container, which is container is completely recreated. Yes. Now, after some time, initial delay seconds comes here. Initial delay seconds comes here. It is restarted 29 seconds ago. As per the initial delay seconds, when is the next readiness probe? When is the next readiness probe health check? After 60 seconds period seconds is 10. So is it going to perform at 70th second, that readiness probe? So still it is showing 0 by 1. Still I have only one pod. Now any request is coming, is it always going to that pod where my application is healthy? I'm not experiencing any 404s or any errors, because it is request is going to that pod. But now this is ready. This is ready. Now initial period is over. The readiness probe is successful. Now can I see both endpoints again like this? Now is service is going to route the traffic to any of these pod now? One time one pod, another time another pod. So do you see the advantage of this liveness probe and readiness probes? It is like a mandatory to use. It is not like a optional. It is like a mandatory to use. Is everyone clear what is this liveness probe and readiness probe? How it works in Kubernetes? We are going to use these things also in the actual pods containers. Thank you guys. That's it for today. Tomorrow I'm not taking class for you because I want you to practice all these Kubernetes concepts, whatever has been discussed. So tomorrow no class for you. Next class is on Monday, but make sure you utilize these two sessions, these 2 days, and practice whatever has been discussed. Now at the same time, I want to define a liveness probe, readiness probe for different application, like your Node.js application or Python application or Spring Boot application. I want you to define the liveness probe, readiness probe for Node.js application or Python application or any other application also, so that you can understand. So practice, do the CI/CD also, using Kubernetes also, try to deploy all these things. Practice HPA, practice this liveness probes, readiness probes, all these things. I'll continue on Monday. Have a great weekend. Try to utilize this weekend for practicing. Next week onwards, no holidays till the course is completed. Only this Saturday is holiday. Next week onwards, no holidays. I need another 10 classes, another 10 to 12 classes maximum. Another 10 to 12 classes maximum I need. That's it. Thank you guys. We'll see you on Monday.